transformation and basic income. We'll be listening to Sue Bradford and Josh McGee and Ashlee Manthey. Ashlee will be joining us later. She's not here yet, but she'll be here. Sue is our first speaker.
Oh, thank you, Scott, and thank you, organisers of this conference. I realise how difficult it must be having to do a hybrid conference like this. I can't imagine how difficult it is. So greetings to people that are out there watching online and to everybody that's come to this session. I'm one of a small group of people here from the neighbouring country, Aotearoa, New Zealand. I assume you all know where that is, just across the Tasman Sea, but still we've been pretty isolated over the last 3 years with COVID, isolated from the rest of the world, and it's great to be here today. We were really disappointed when the BIEN conference was postponed from Brisbane, because this was our big chance to come and meet people in person. So I'm really grateful to be here with you this week. I've actually got a written paper so that will be a lot longer than what I can present here. So if anyone's interested in the whole paper, I actually have copies here, if there's anyone that interested, because this is just going to be quite a light once over. And what I was aiming to do, because I don't think anyone's done it for a while, is to try and do a situational analysis of where the work for basic income is happening in Aotearoa at the moment and in recent times. And then a look at where we might go in the near future, like with a sort of overview of the whole situation in the country. Just very quickly about myself, my name's Sue Bradford. I've been involved in work around basic income off and on since the early 1990s, when I worked in the unemployed workers and welfare claimants movement in New Zealand for about 16 years, and we were really into it back then. And there was a national network of what we called UBI then, UBI Advocacy, back in the 1990s, but that folded at the end of the 1990s. I went to Parliament as a Green MP, with greetings to a current Green MP here. But unfortunately, the Green Party in 1999 in Aotearoa, we had a big, shall we say, debate about UBI, and the party was split right across the whole party. The upshot was that our policy ended up being very, very moderate, and pretty much the same one it is now, which is basically that they're into investigating it and only going forward with it if there's enough public support. That's pretty much where they came from. So I spent 10 years as a Green MP, and then I'm back out in the community sector now. So this is a brief what I'm trying to cover today, only I don't think I have enough time to do all the detail. A snapshot of the current context that we're operating in the current situation with political parties in Parliament, with one party outside Parliament that Ian talked about before. A quick look at the situation with people commenting and acting for basic income outside the New Zealand Parliament. And then I've done a SWOT analysis, a strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats analysis of the current situation in New Zealand, and then looked at some paths forward. So we've basically had two generations of basic income advocacy here. With that time in the 1990s, and then a second generation that really started in 2009 with a very wealthy man called Gareth Morgan introduced something called the Big Kahuna, which was a form of basic income because he had a lot of money behind him and pushed it really hard. It uplifted the debate into basic income in New Zealand again. And so there was a second generation of activity that started in 2009 and hasn't stopped since then, basically. And during that period, Guy Standing, who's speaking with us later today, and who I miss not seeing here at this conference because he's been over to New Zealand quite a few times and really influenced our progress on it there. Guy Standing worked with Gaining and Ian Middleton and others here to set up basic income, help set up basic income in New Zealand, and they've been going, kia ora to the bins people, since 2015. But I'm not part of Basic Income New Zealand myself because I'm a very political activist in in Aotearoa, and bins has to be really non-party political. And so I have to keep my distance really. I'm too overtly radical left. And I would just like to say in a positioning statement that I do come from the redistributive and what I would call radical left end of the basic income debate, and see it essentially as a political question, and that the only resolutions to it, the only way we're going to get basic income in our country or anywhere else is through political power. And everything speakers today have said so far has really reinforced that. So our context, I won't dwell on because it's very similar to what everyone else's countries are going through. COVID's had a huge impact. We've got deepening inequality that's been going on for generations now. Our unemployment is comparatively low as a result of COVID and very much reduced migration. But it's a strange dichotomy where we've got very low unemployment, but also at the same time a section of the population in very deep poverty, and that's particularly Māori and Pacific Island people in that poverty. We've also, of course, facing the same challenges as the rest of the world with the climate crisis and all the ecological implications. But I guess we were a little bit different, though I feel it's been interesting to see the acknowledgement of country here today, because in Aotearoa there's a lot of work been happening over the last decades in bringing the Māori voice forward, and kia ora Bella for being part of this conference too. And there's a lot of work going on from Māori challenging those of us who aren't Māori to get on board with constitutional change, grounded in the recognition of our founding document, Te Tiriti o Waitangi. And there's a huge rise of interest in this from non-Māori people as well. And this is a big part of the context in which basic income debates, I think, are happening right now, and where we will need to keep working in our country. I'll be interested to see what Indigenous people from here and other places might have to say about this debate in the next couple of days. In Parliament, we have 5 parties represented. Labor has an absolute majority, even though we're under a proportional representation system. They unusually, for the first time, one party has absolute control. But in the last election, the Green Party with 10 MPs also signed a cooperation agreement. So they have ministers and a part of the government. ACT is our far-right party, also with 10 MPs. National is the majority Conservative party. The Māori Party has 2 MPs. The positions of those parties on basic income, Labor, as Ian said earlier, Labor has shown interest in the past, and there's probably some Labor Party members who are into it, but the party itself is not supportive of it and has made, I think, quite a deliberate decision around 2016 not to support basic income. The Greens, as I say, have a very moderate policy, but at least they talk about it and have some support for it, so there is hope there. ACT is right out the other end, and as is National on welfare. The leader of the National Party, Christopher Luxon, recently talked about welfare claimants as being bottom feeders, so that might give you some idea of where he's coming from. The Māori Party only has 2 MPs. You'll see them there at the bottom. And they're, while it's a very small party and not aligned to any other party in the House, they have a very powerful voice. And while they don't support basic income, as far as I know, in formal terms, their welfare policy is extremely good and would align with any development towards basic income, I think, because of the strength of their welfare policy. Outside Parliament, we have the top party, which is called the Opportunities Party, that was set up by Gareth Morgan, the same guy who called for that big kahuna back in 2009. He's the top party. While Gareth Morgan's no longer with the top party, its leader is now a guy, I'm not quite sure how to pronounce his name, Reimagining, who's actually an excellent spokesperson for basic income, and it's quite exciting to see the work that he is doing around it quite vocally. It's their headline policy. It's not a bad policy. They're a very centrist party. I wouldn't call them left. But I think the fact that they are pushing this, and we've got an election next year, is quite significant. And there's a real role that they're playing that no one else is. That's really important in the terms of any political moves to basic income in New Zealand at the moment. I have to say though, the recent polling, TOP's lucky if it gets 1%, and you need 5% in our country or electorate seats to be able to get a presence in Parliament. So the Māori Party's there because they have 2 MPs in electorate seats, but TOP can't get there because they have no electorate seat. So they're very weak. So their main role at the moment I see as being a lobby party for basic income, rather than, so who knows where it'll go, but I do see that it's very useful. Outside Parliament, there's no type. This will be probably more interest to people inside New Zealand, but I did have a real scan of what's out there, both academically and in public comment. And I was really heartened by the range of debate that's been happening in the last few years. Some of it has been created by the COVID crisis, and people like Māori commentator Morgan Godfrey writing in 2021 saying that the government should implement a basic income in Auckland, our largest city, which was, that was great. Max Harris, a prominent left academic and commentator, is part of the current Efeso Collins Merrill campaign, and they've put up a policy for, he advocates for basic income, and they've also they have a policy of free public transport. And I think in terms of spreading the idea of the commons, that's quite a big step because that hasn't happened before. On the radical left, where I sit politically, some of the debates where I get annoyed with my erstwhile friends is where they push universal basic services rather than UBI or BI, which I think is another trend around the world, where universal basic services is put up as a necessary, like there's a contradiction or problem, whereas for me there is no problem. They go side by side, but I think it's used as something of an excuse not to engage with basic income. Then there's Basic Income New Zealand itself, which, as I said, has been going since 2015, and Ian Middleton gave a very good paper this morning. And I guess the most notable spaces where I've seen them make an input have been recently through Ian's work, through the work of Bella Moke and her colleague, who will be joining the conference, I think, on starting to think about how to adapt or work with basic income on Māori's side in the Māori world. And Gaining and others have done a lot of work on trying to introduce the idea of the commons into New Zealand, where it's not a well-known concept and actually does run straight up against ideas of Māori sovereignty, because the commons is about owning, for example, land in common. But if you have Indigenous people saying, this is, as we've heard this morning here, this is our land, this is where we stand, we never ceded it. When you have people, we didn't cede this land. I've been in a lot of debates with Māori saying, we don't like the commons. What right have you guys from outside, you colonisers and descendants of the colonisers, to come in and say you have common ownership of what is ours? And so it becomes part of our constitutional transformational debates and economic power debates and political debates. It gets quite tangled up. Then there's a range of community groups from outside, again, in the grassroots or outside Parliament, that have some support for basic income, including the kind of anti-poverty and unemployed and beneficiary groups. The arts and creative sector has a particular interest, and Sophie's here with us this week from that world because of the precarious nature of arts and creative work. In my own organisation, Kōtare Research and Education for Social Change, we try and do work that's helping to strengthen networks around this. I haven't got time to do this now, all that analysis I did. If you would like, I might just leave copies of the paper there so that people, because we're out of time, just about, so that people can, if you have an interest in the New Zealand situation, you can see the detail. And the last part of the paper, again, no time, but just some thoughts about the way forward for us in New Zealand, and maybe just a couple of things out of that. This may have come from Basic Income Earth Network itself, But this idea of strategizing and thinking forward in 10 years, I think is a really good one. We need to see it as a long haul, as a long-term plan, really, that we don't think it's not going to happen unless something extraordinary takes place. It's not going to happen overnight in our country, and probably not in a lot of other places. But if we did more strategic planning with some of the people that I've found over the last week doing this paper, I hadn't realised the extent of interest and support. I think there's more people interested from particular places than what I'd realised. And I think if we found a way to get together and do some strategising, thinking of it as a 10-year plan, looking at when elections come, looking at the role that our political parties and potential political movements can play or could play, that would be a really useful exercise. And really just doing some work on generating and lifting to what we haven't got in our country is any kind of movement building around this. And while BINZ plays a critical role, they're not a movement building organisation. And so we need, for me coming from that movement building sector, it's going to be really important, I think, to incorporate the call for a progressive basic income into the wider work around solving all the big crises, climate justice, social and economic inequity, what's happening in the Māori world, all of those things brought together with basic income as a core stream of it. And on that note, I'll finish. Kia ora, thank you.
Yeah.
Stay up here, and we're going to do like 5 minutes of questions. Does anybody have any questions for Sue? I guess, okay.
Sorry, could you just go into a little bit more detail about what the big kahuna was?
It was I don't even know that I don't think I've got all the details here. It was a plan, I think it was it's set at $9,000 a year at that time in 2009. And people like me saw it as a regressive basic income because it said all welfare benefits would be it. So that means, of course, that a lot of people on benefits would be on a lot less money. And for people like us, that's not acceptable.
Any other questions? I'm kind of curious, since we do have like a few minutes and you had to skip by the SWOT analysis, can you just maybe just like cover a little bit of the SWOT?
Yeah, I felt, oh gosh, that was an interesting bit. Was for me anyway, actually trying to look at, what's happening. Yeah, thank you. So just ripping through it real fast, in terms of people working for basic income in New Zealand, the strengths I saw, the fact that Basic Income New Zealand, our friends here, are still going. A fantastic tribute to a few people doing an awful lot of work with very few resources, and also providing the link into Basic Income Earth Network. It's really critical. And also the role in starting to open up discussion again on Māori's side. The fact that there's wider interest than what I thought there would be once I started taking this kind of mega picture of it, including the arts sector, which is always a wonderful sector to have involved in any movement because of what you bring, and still a lot of interest on the academic side as well. And even though it's a minor force in outside Parliament, I think the role that TOP could play is really significant. And there are, with the Green Party, there are a number of people that still talk to me inside the Green Party, and there's some of them that would really love to see basic income made a lot stronger inside Green Party policy and priorities. The weaknesses for us that I see, that while Basic Income New Zealand works really hard, it is the only single issue organisation dedicated to this. There's a limit in terms of your people and resources, which kind of holds things back a bit beyond your control. And that wider support for basic income in a coordinated way doesn't exist. And we haven't got a common framework, a common agreement, a common plan that you have to have as part of movement building. And of course, anyone that knows about politics knows you have to have the movement outside Parliament as well as the parties trying to get in to be able to achieve success. And we just don't have that movement side of it. I think if we had a stronger movement side, we could push the Green Party over a little bit more. And I'm so pleased to see you here as a Green Party because I was held back. I was there for 10 years and had to really hold back because the party did not have a strong policy. So it was kind of an opportunity lost. So the fact that you can speak openly is fabulous. On the left, we don't have that agreement on scope. And there is that off-putting factor about some of the work around basic income in terms of the language that's used and the way it's presented. That means that people that don't have a tertiary education, that can't speak English or understand English all that well. We have a big migrant communities in New Zealand. Māori, a lot of people don't necessarily understand what the hell you're talking about when you talk about basic income. And while a lot of people have tried to work in that area, I don't know that, as part of movement building, it will be essential to be able to use language that ordinary people can understand. And that's always been an issue. The opportunities for us, that I think the fact that these debates are still happening, and actually I think the level of debate has improved certainly since that first generation I was in, but even over the last few years, the quality of the debates and the range of ideas that have been put up, and the fact that TOP's putting up a good speaker and good policy, that really gives me hope. And I'm also aware that a lot of work on the climate justice side ties into this as well, and that's really important part of work on the left in our country too. Thank you, Geraldine. Thanks.
Thank you, Sue. Thanks for our hand. Next up is Josh McGee.
Thank you, Scott. Hello, everybody. So I am Josh McGee. For people who don't know, I founded Basic Income Australia, which is the most active grassroots group in Australia. I'm a bit nervous. I don't like giving presentations, so I'm going to stick to the script and jump straight into it. Oh, wait. The slides. 1 second while we get the slides ready. So jobs take the best hours of the best years of people's lives. But what if people didn't have to do this work? For many people, this is the appeal of a basic income, the promise of being able to spend your life the way that you want to spend it. Unfortunately, it's not a promise that a basic income alone can deliver on universally, because while some people might be free to pursue their interests outside of work, others would have to continue working in order to keep society functioning. The simple fact is that as long as essential industries like waste management, food production, and water treatment require hands on deck, somebody has to do that work. Of course, as basic income increases their negotiating power, the workers in these industries may have improved working conditions and higher pay, but there will always be a percentage of workers required, which creates a key challenge in convincing people that a basic income is a good idea. What would happen if everybody stopped working? As activists engaged in the basic income discussion, you probably want to cite the trials that have been done, which suggests this isn't a likely scenario. But given the small scale and limited scope of the trials to date, I have a lot of empathy for the people who don't want to risk their livelihood on something that's not completely predictable. And for those people who aren't convinced by the existing data, there's nothing you could tell them that would change their minds, which creates an upper ceiling to the support for a basic income. But what if everybody could stop working and society could continue functioning? A lot of decisions are made based on the assumption that this isn't possible, but I think it is. What I propose is a policy that would work in perfect tandem with a basic income, and one that I think we should advocate for alongside it. A national automation authority. This would be a government agency with an explicit objective to automate people's jobs. Now, of course, automating everybody out of work would be an impossible task. Many jobs are designed to meet people's desires, and in theory, there is no limit to people's desires, but people's needs are finite. And this is why I think the National Automation Authority should focus on the jobs that are necessary to the functioning of society. Then let's say there was a mass exodus from jobs. It might be sad to no longer have yoga instructors, baristas, and elective surgeons, but they would pale in comparison to not having food, water, and electricity. While the line does blur between necessary and unnecessary, COVID lockdowns have done us great favor in helping to clarify where those boundaries lie. Now, I want to be clear what I mean when I talk about automation, because you might be imagining a Terminator robot building a house. The definition that's most useful for me is something that's able to act without human intervention. Like when you sign up to a website and it sends you that email to validate your account, nobody was sitting there manually sending the email. It was automated. So sure, I'm happy for the robot building the house to be classified as automation, but so would, I've lost my spot. But so would a nicely designed user interface if it meant people were able to find the information they were looking for intuitively without having to ask for help. If I were to take this thought to its extreme, you could even classify books as a form of automation. Rather than the author having to say what they want to say again and again, the book can allow them to communicate at scale. It's also useful to think about automation as a process that can and often should be incremental. As an example, a professional chef performs tasks that are so diverse, it would be an overwhelming challenge to think about automating them all at once. But an incremental approach would break down the tasks of a chef and develop a dicing solution, a frying solution, a stirring solution, and so on. Each incremental step would lessen the workload on the chef further and further until they're useful to have around but are no longer needed. This context of an industrial kitchen also highlights another important factor to consider, which is that it's often easier to modify an environment to make it more suitable for machinery than it is to design a machine that integrates into environments designed for humans. Modern kitchens are designed to be used with dexterous hands at waist height, and while some companies do attempt to build robots for this kind of environment, they're typically found lacking because they're not the conditions that machines are optimized for. Barcodes and QR codes are great examples of how an environment can be created to be more suitable for machines. For most people, a label is easy enough to interpret, and a lot of effort could be put into some kind of machine learning model that can predict and classify a label as well as we can. But a high contrast black and white pattern is a more machine-friendly solution, even if it is unreadable to most humans. The principle of designing an environment to better suit automation is also shown in the construction of train tracks and roads. Rather than developing some kind of robotic horse that can handle all terrains, we've created an environment that is more suitable to the simple mechanical motion of wheels. And it's easy to become numb to the complicated systems of car manufacturing, road laws, driver licensing, traffic light systems, and so on, that have been developed in order to automate the job that horses used to hold. This wasn't a small feat. We've seen similar investments in national plumbing networks, electricity grids, and telecommunications grids. These large-scale investments demonstrate we're capable of structural environmental change. We've done it before, and with motivation, we can do it again. Now, if we're talking about the automation of necessary and life-critical functions, these would be disastrous to have fail, so it's important to talk briefly about fail-safe strategies. Redundancy is typically implemented in existing critical systems, and it allows for segments of the system to fail without the overall functionality from failing. For example, a plane might have two engines, but only one might be needed in order for the plane to operate. Of course, ideally, no individual segment should fail, and a safety factor can be used to design more robust systems. For example, an elevator might be designed with an expected maximum capacity of 1,000 kilograms, but the materials and mechanisms might be then designed to handle several times that, say 10,000 kilograms. Now, I've talked broadly about automation principles, but what might a national automation authority practically look like? There are many existing agencies and departments that provide an example of a path forward, but personally, I think the Department of Defense is the most relevant one to imitate. This is partially due to the way that it's able to coordinate internal and external contractors to achieve many projects simultaneously, but more importantly, its sense of scale and priority is used to soak up a significant portion of Australian engineering talent. And far too often, war is justified by the technological innovation it results in, and I'd like to see that same level of scale and priority put towards meeting people's needs in a war against poverty and mandatory labour. Generally, I envision the department working in three phases. The first would be to define the areas of greatest potential impact. That means identifying jobs that are both common and necessary, and then prioritising them based on how common and necessary they are. It should also consider how easily automated these tasks are. Jobs that require human interaction, like caring work and therapy, should be lower on the list than jobs in which workers are already treated like machines. Step 2 would be to develop an automation roadmap for the defined task, and then step 3 would be to implement that roadmap. So let's consider a case study. Let's say that during the first phase, the job identified was sorting recycling. Currently, this is partially done autonomously, using weight and magnets to filter heavier and more ferrous materials, but then lightweight, non-ferrous materials are then sorted by hand. Now, there is a robot capable of this lightweight sorting, which you can see on the right, and it's not currently implemented in Australia because human workers are cheaper. During the second phase, research would be done into whether or not the solution should be developed in-house, contracted out, or purchased from an existing pool. And then finally, to roll this out, it might look like open sourcing the system details into the public domain and providing ongoing support to organizations that want to implement it for themselves. This would level the playing field, empowering smaller organizations to take advantage of technologies that are currently only accessible to large companies. This recycling case study is, of course, hypothetical, It would be impossible for me as a lone individual to develop a solution at this scale by myself, but this is why having a larger, more resourced body focused on this is so important. The next question you might ask is that if this is possible, why hasn't it been done already? The answer is simple. It's just not the priority. Many political decisions are currently made with the explicit objective to create jobs, because those are the logical political priorities in a world in which jobs are the foundations to a stable life. But this is where the integration with the basic income comes in, because these two proposals solve the political weaknesses of one another. A national automation authority is a wildly unappealing proposal in a world without a strong social safety net, and when work is the defining feature of people's lives. And a basic income doesn't seem like an appealing proposal to people who are concerned about the prospect of an unstable economy in a world with a less central focus on jobs. Often a basic income is proposed in fear of automation, but let's take this idea and flip it so that a basic income can be the first step towards embracing automation. Rather than continuing to develop these systems repeatedly at small scales and for private interests, we can take a more deliberate approach to develop them for the public good. As an engineer, this proposal doesn't come from a naive idea that this new world can exist tomorrow, but rather an acknowledgement that this will take time and energy, and that it's a goal worth prioritizing and taking steps towards, for the sake of creating a society that can more securely meet people's needs, so everyone can spend their lives doing what they want to do, not what they have to do to survive. Thank you.
Right, that was you got some extra time here.
Yeah, I know.
That's good. Do we have any questions for Josh?
Thank you, Josh. Very interesting presentation. But on the end, I don't understand. You said about replacement from humans with the machines, but I didn't understand why we must do it, because of machines can do their jobs more better or more efficiently or something else, or because of nobody wants to do space jobs or military jobs.
Yeah, so just for people online, the question is, why should we do this, basically? And there are a few different reasons, but the core of it is that people shouldn't have to work. And as long as this doesn't exist, there will always have to be people who have to work. And so, say again?
Shouldn't have to work.
They shouldn't be forced to. We should. Well, I mean, that's from my perspective an ethical question. Yeah. I mean, yeah. I don't want to talk too much. Yeah.
Once upon a time, we used to have government-funded research and technology to such an extent that we were creating negative things, and then it all got left up to the market. I guess the question is, how do we, in the current economic status quo, if there are things that are currently automated because there can't be seen to be profit in it, are things already being so automated that there's not really much left for the public sector? I mean, personally, I would like to.
Wait, sorry, Clark.
Yeah, no, the question was not actually. Let me start again. So, in an ideal world, in my ideal world, you wouldn't have the profit motive getting in the way of creating what people actually need in life. So you would have as much automation as possible, you have as much leisure time as possible.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess if we're looking at the current system as being so profit motivated, there is already such an incentive to automate to the nth degree, because then you're reducing your labour costs. What is it that I guess what are the bits that aren't being automated that you see as being the thing that this independent authority would do?
I mean, the one that I gave was the recycling example. Sorry, I'll just repeat the question for online. So the question is, it's that.
But there's already incentives for corporations.
Yeah, there are already incentives for corporations to do it.
What is it that's left over that we want the sort of public authority to be automating?
So.
Can I try and restate that? So
Thank you.
what are the things we should try to automate next?
Yeah.
Sure.
I just feel like a lot of the companies are focused on things that aren't necessary. They're automating things that are around the edges. It's chatbots. It's, sorry, I'm not great on my feet like this. And so I think really what I'm trying to say is that previously in history we've had goals, like when we went to war, there's like a driving motive behind society. I feel like right now we're kind of floating. I feel like nobody knows what we're working towards. And I think if this was part of the agenda, we can kind of see the path towards a more autonomous future where people don't have to work is clearer. And that's what I'm trying to get across. Does that answer the question? Not really.
No, and to be fair, it was not a very good question. But I guess, this is the age-old thing of improved production process by automating.
Yeah.
But we don't have any requirements for corporations or whoever to then actually distribute the benefit of that to workers. Workers just lose their jobs.
Right. And
So-
it's quite concerning, I think, how these things are developed for private interests. And so self-driving cars, for example, where's the public self-driving car? How come it's all profit motivated? And so having an organization that was focused on making things public and accessible, I think is important. Any other questions?
Another question? I guess I just wanted to jump in a bit too, and like one of the ways I think about this is like the assumption that like we're automating as much as we can because of like markets want to do that. At the same time, I feel that like there's a lot of essentially human labor is too cheap kind of thing where especially if there's a low minimum wage, and so then you could actually leverage a higher minimum wage. Like if there was a goal in society to automate more, you could purposely make human labor more expensive, which would create the incentive to do more automation.
Yes.
And also there's like the difference between like jobs people don't want to do and jobs people do want to do. And so like you would imagine that you wouldn't really want to focus on automating jobs people really enjoy as much as people really dislike. And maybe that's like the focus that they would start with
Which,
first.
I mean, right now we're seeing with these image generation programs putting artists out of work. And on Twitter, they're furious. The artists do not want to be automated. So why are we putting so much energy into it? Why are all the AI technicians automating people who don't want to be automated? It doesn't make any sense. This is what I meant by excess, like superfluous tasks.
Yes.
Where would there be room for humans?
People can live as humans. They can do what they want to do. It's about when you don't have to do this work, you can do whatever you want to do. And even if there are machines that can do what you want to do, so for example, you love knitting, knitting machines currently exist. It doesn't stop you from knitting. You can keep knitting.
Yeah, especially when there's a basin paired with it,
Right.
Again,
That's
just
why
do
I'm
one
presenting
thing.
here, because it has to be part of that pair.
Right.
Because I don't think either policy is foolproof without the other.
And are we still waiting for Ashley to arrive here?
Oh.
Miss Ashley's here.
Ashley's
Great. Yeah. Ashley, do you want to come up next?
Thank you.
And you want to give Josh a minute?
Thank you. So my name's Ashlee. I'm from right here in Brisbane. I recently graduated from the Queensland University of Technology, or QUT, with a Bachelor of Human Services and a Bachelor of Creative Industries. I'm a bit new to the basic income space as part of my final placement for my Human Services degree at the start of this year. I was very fortunate enough to work with the wonderful Jenny Mays. I'm sure some of you may know her, but I worked with her to develop basically my research skills and explore the social, economic, political, and cultural factors associated with a basic income. And as part of this, I developed the idea for this paper, Reimagining a Post-Capitalist Aged Care System in Australia, the Transformative Potential of a Basic Income. When I began my placement, I was actually working in aged care as a diversional therapist. Here I was experiencing and witnessing some of the immediate crises and issues affecting the aged care sector in Australia, the understaffing, low pay rates, and lacking quality of care. And then on the other hand, I had this concept of a basic income that I was exploring, and I could really see its potential to transform the aged care sector. During my research, I found articles that discussed what a basic income could mean for Australians, capitalism undervaluing caring roles, and the challenges affecting aged care, but I found few that considered all aspects together, despite, to me, there being an obvious linkage and opportunity there. My work on this topic constitutes a very basic analysis. The purpose of this project for me was really just to open the discussion for alternative ways of caring for the aged that might be achieved with the implementation of a basic income, but ultimately to make connections between what is already known about the transformative possibility and applying that into the aged care sector in Australia. In my work on this topic, I explored how ideas of failing capitalism applied to Australia's aged care system and how care settings are structured on the basis of neoliberalism. I considered the labour shortages, low wages, and inadequate care currently causing immediate crises in the sector, and I thereby drew out some key themes and failures of capitalism to focus on, and they were privatisation of care and notions of value and work. Using this deconstructed landscape, I propose a post-capitalist way forward for the aged care system that considers alternatives to the current capitalist model. The failures are a result of capitalist influence, so what difference might it make if the system was more egalitarian and oriented towards a commons approach? I also show the integral role a basic income plays in negotiating this transformation, not only for the aged care sector, but also for wider society. The aim is to show that a basic income as a regular, non-means tested payment to all adults would provide a pathway towards a post-capitalist, more socially just, care-oriented aged care system, but also within an overall transformation agenda to a socially just society. To begin, it is important to paint a picture of aged care in Australia. Stories of a sector in crisis have dominated Australian media in recent years, and the situation has only been exacerbated with the pandemic, with lockdowns, restrictions, and isolation requirements creating even more challenges for a sector that was already struggling. When most people hear aged care, they think of out-of-home residential care services, but the system also includes in-home, domestic, personal, and healthcare assistance, as well as respite and other accommodation. Funded primarily by the Australian government, the Aged Care Act 1997 had been the governing legislation for the standards and quality of care and rights and regulations. However, that was until the Royal Commission into Aged Care Quality and Safety took place between 2018 and 2021, and the Aged Care Quality and Safety Commission was since established. The Royal Commission's final report was titled Care, Dignity and Respect, and it exposed the true extent of the crisis, with the Commission finding a pattern of societal neglect surrounding aged care that has left services fragmented, unsupported, and underfunded. Additionally, I found it well agreed upon in the literature that it was the 1997 Aged Care Act that marked the beginning of this crisis in aged care, as it allowed widespread privatisation, lacked legal obligations for service providers, and neglected minimum staffing requirements. It is important to note here too that elderly people often receive informal care from family and friends, and while these people are often not formally recognised as accessing aged care, they are still certainly affected by the systemic issues. By all accounts, the demand for aged care is increasing in Australia due to the ageing population increasing with people living longer. Yet the problem needing to be addressed becomes even more complex when you consider the workers who are also affected by the current crises. Staffing levels were already an issue prior to the pandemic, for reasons I will explore further, but COVID-19 complicated the situation when hard border closures and travel restrictions stopped the migration of overseas and interstate workers, who often filled many roles in the industry. As I'll show in a moment, these people in caring roles are overwhelmingly, fundamentally undervalued by the capitalist system in which they work, exacerbating ongoing staffing problems and sustaining low wages, resulting in many workers leaving and intending to leave the sector, despite Australian government attempts at retention payments and cash bonuses. And this is where capitalism comes in, or rather the failure of. Current capitalist models of care are just not working, and it is not only the people receiving the care that are suffering, but also the workers, informal carers, and family members, which is what makes change so necessary. Marx's Communist Manifesto and Hardin's Tragedy of the Commons essay are two key literary pieces that speak to the failures of capitalism. The Communist Manifesto predicted the trajectory of capitalism to result in people irrationally accumulating capital and creating class divisions between rich and poor. And it's a widely held concept that it almost reflects where we are as a society today. The Tragedy of the Commons essay, then, was written in the context of groups of individuals acting in their own interest, depleting shared limited natural resources such as land, fish, and forests. But the concept can easily be applied to aged care and healthcare more generally, where care is a shared resource and corporations control and charge exorbitant fees for it. And the tragedy in that is affordability and access decreases. I think an equally important point about these pieces is that they were written in the 19th and 20th centuries. This idea that capitalist ways of operating are not working and instead failing us is not a new concept by any means. But now more than ever, people are waking up, so to speak, and questioning why private corporations are profiting from our healthcare and basic needs. Capitalism manifests in multiple ways, such as neoliberal management practices, but for the system as a whole, it creates the conditions for underpaid, undervalued staff, unsupported informal carers, and an abundance of privatised care facilities. I mentioned in my introduction that some of the key failures of capitalism present in the aged care system are privatisation and notions of work and value. While I talk about them separately when deconstructing the impact of capitalism, it is almost arbitrary because they are inextricably intertwined in the current system and in the alternatives and solutions required. Privatisation is one of the more obvious outcomes of capitalism. In its simplest definition, it is a market based on private ownership. With this and the laxity of the Aged Care Act 1997, private corporations are dominating the aged care system. Drawing on Marx again, in capitalist terms, everything is a commodity, including essential healthcare, which creates an environment where businesses all too often focus on profits rather than care. As for notions of work, operating in a capitalist system means that the value of one's work is determined by economic terms. I use the term work in a very broad sense, because as I mentioned, care may be informally received at home from family members. A more accurate description is contributions to society. To the same tune, people's contributions to society are put into economic terms, and care work is generally undervalued because it lacks economic output, despite being an essential service, which translates into lower wages. This creates a very unjust situation for workers who are forced to work longer hours just to earn a living wage, and begins to point just where a UBI would provide security for these people. In such a capitalist model, informal carers are hardly recognised. Due to wishes or affordability concerns, some elderly people choose to be cared for at home, sometimes leaving family and friends having to consider how they will meet the care needs whilst maintaining their own financial security. And evidence clearly shows that caring responsibilities can limit the carer's ability to remain employed. There is currently income support available for unpaid carers and has been since the 1980s, but each iteration and policy change has shifted more towards a provision that still encourages involvement in paid work to facilitate financial security. This creates a situation that must be addressed, particularly given the demand for care by family members is only projected to increase in the future. It's clear there needs to be real change, and it's almost obvious where a UBI can help. Post-capitalism, then, is an alternative to capitalism. The exact definition is contested, but it essentially entails an overhaul and shifting of the capitalist systems. There are accounts this shift is already happening, with Paul Mason, author of the book Post-Capitalism, A Guide to Our Future, highlighting collaborative production and ways of working, and the sharing economy as examples of this. Such a shift is what is necessary in the aged care system, particularly given the problems are not isolated to one group of people. There are multiple shifts possible in a post-capitalist system, facilitated by a basic income. Generally, it would be a commons, egalitarian approach to care with increased financial security for everyone. First and foremost, the financial security of a basic income would allow people the security and freedom to decide whether they stay in the aged care workforce, whether that be at similar or fewer hours than before, provide care to a family member, or enter the aged care system as a new worker, without having to worry about financial pressures due to low wages, which could also positively impact staffing levels. In fact, Anglicare Australia did a survey in 2021 that asked respondents how a permanent basic income would change the way they spend their time or organise their lives. 22% said they would care for friends or family members in need of help, and 9% said they would change jobs or industries. What this entails overall, on a more conceptual level, is rethinking people's contribution to society. Work, or one's contribution to society, would no longer need to be market-oriented or done for income's sake, if there was a financial safety net from a basic income. And this is not a new concept. In fact, it's exactly what Marx argued. People gain freedom of choice when work is no longer an absolute necessity to earn a living. Additionally, for the elderly receiving the care, a basic income ensures them the same financial security given to anyone else. For informal and unpaid carers, their work would shift to being recognised as entirely valuable to society in a post-capitalist sense, because value would no longer be determined by economic output. It recognises their contributions are no less than those in formal care settings. This shift would pave the way for more community-based commons approaches to care. At this point, I bring in a quote from Nobel Prize winner Elinor Ostro's work, Governing the Commons, where she said, "The tragedy of the commons is not predestined. Moreover, that through a set of community-based rules and conditions, this tragedy can be averted." Communities could work together to support elderly members to retain community links, support independence, and reduce social isolation. Again, community-based approaches as part of a shift towards a basic income are not new by any means, but they are certainly something the Australian government has not considered as a serious solution to the aged care crisis. As all adult citizens would receive the basic income payments, the freedom to opt into caring roles extends past those already involved in the sector, and taking the imperative away from paid employment already opens up the possibility for increased community participation more generally. The transformative potential of a basic income for a broader transformation towards a post-capitalist society is almost obvious. The changes possible in the aged care system reflect changes possible for the broader society. A universal basic income has the potential to transform the way we value people's contributions to society away from just in economic terms. The financial security afforded by a basic income would allow the freedom of choice to participate in society how one chooses, not just in terms of what is possible in the confines of paid employment and earning a living wage. So the purpose of this paper was to show how a basic income can transform the aged care system in Australia, from one that is inherently capitalist to operating as a post-capitalist system. Currently, workers are undervalued, underpaid, and quality of care is lacking due to the system being in a state of crisis. A post-capitalist system would instead entail re-envisaged notions of work, a reliance on community rather than private institutions, and overall create a society where people stop profiting from the care of other people. Everything I've spoken about is really just the tip of the iceberg of what is possible. There are many opportunities for further research in this space, such as implementation, modelling, pilot schemes, and considering overseas experiences. The picture painted of the current aged care sector in Australia is undeniably one of a system in crisis, and a basic income holds that transformative potential. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashley. Do we have any questions for Ashley? Yes.
Thank you. Actually, I think your presentation is very close to my research about the vision of the concept of work, and I'm interested in your point of view about post-capitalism. Do you think we need an alternative to capitalism? What is the difference between capitalism and post-capitalism in your opinion? And this part, the social part on the right side on the slide about financial security, community-based approach. It's not belonging really to capitalism, but it's not a contrary to capitalism. Do you think we need really a new concept of post-capitalism, or we can take the old known capitalism and just update it?
So the question was essentially, do we really need like a massive shift to a post-capitalist like alternative to a capitalist society? I think kind of what's been spoken about today is that like any shift or any introduction of a UBI is good, like no matter how, I guess, how massive the shift or how massive the payment would be. I think more so like just from the perspective of like aged care specifically, like I think a massive systemic change is needed. I think that it's too overtaken by privatized facilities to, I think, I was going to say to consider small changes, but like any small change would be helpful. Yeah, I don't know where I'm going with this. Yeah, basically, in essence, we might not need a massive post-capitalist shift, but I think any change towards that would be beneficial.
I agree with you. This great shift is already happened, but there's a difference between the changes in the habits or traditions or changes in the notion or terms or concepts, and from the philosophical point of view, do we need really a new concept of something, or we just can take the old concept and refresh it with a new criteria? Do you think we really need a new concept for capitalism? And if yes, what is the crucial difference?
Did you want to say?
I just want to say I describe myself as a first capitalist. I think that I view it as very much about taking the capitalist sector of society, of the economy, and putting it in a little box, and allowing it to exist in a small part of our society while we also grow cooperative and collaborative parts of our society and the public sector. So I personally think that we absolutely do need to change the economy, and that the UBI is the fundamental base on which we do that. Can I ask a question?
Yes.
I think the aged care sector is one of those perfect examples of when we were going through the COVID crisis, people could see so clearly how capitalism can actually interfere with us having a good quality of life. With the privatisation of the aged care sector in Australia, and also with the absolute struggle of people who had to look after people who were having COVID, or having to protect them from getting COVID and changing their lives entirely. Did you consider also in your research this? There's now this drive towards aging in place, and sort of putting more reliance on people to age in their own homes with support of family. Did you also sort of look at how a universal basic income might help reward that situation as well?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I saw, because I found that in the research, and that was certainly like one of the things that was noted in the Royal Commission, that was something that I guess needs to happen, that people need to be able to age in place, as you said, if they choose to. But yeah, that wasn't really, that wasn't something that I really focused on in my research, but it really makes sense that a UBI would allow that, because they'd be able to afford the care that they need their family would be able to afford to look after them.
Do you have any other direct questions for Ashlee? Okay. Thank you, Ashlee. And can we actually get all the speakers back up here, and we'll just do like more of a conversation together. And I mean, maybe some of the speakers have some questions for each other too. Maybe we could even start with that up there as well.
Such a different world.
Did anyone have any questions for anyone? Yeah.
In the previous presentation in New Zealand, you said you were lacking resources in the association. So my question to everybody is, how can we raise more funds for UBI? Where could we find money to promote UBI wherever in the world? Who are the rich people or the rich corporations who could be inclined to give us some money? That's my question.
Yeah, what's the New Zealand context?
Well, the big push, it's always an interesting question. I mean, the big push in the second generation of basic income in New Zealand came from a very rich man, Gareth Morgan, very rich, who poured money into that big kahuna idea and was able to promote it, and so it suddenly generated, the good part of it was it generated discussion again and got the topic up again in public discourse. And he then backed his own political party, the top party, that's still going and promoting basic income. So money has gone and is still going into the top party. So the political party is a vehicle for funding and for trying to enter Parliament on a basic income agenda. Meanwhile, Galen and Ian and Bella over there, they come from Basic Income New Zealand, which is a very, very small community-based organisation that, as far as I can tell, runs off very tiny amount of money. And that's the only issue group that's focused on basic income. And that's why I can see a prospect for building a basic, potentially one could build a basic income movement in New Zealand, but it's like chicken and egg. To have the people and resources able to lobby, advocate, speak out, write the kind of manifestos or visions, to have a common vision that actually embraces what everyone here, as far as I can tell, is talking about, all the beautiful ideas, and putting that out to the New Zealand public to mobilise outside Parliament. I think it's such a movement would gain resources from some people, because there is interest wider than I think we realise across the country, but that mobilising work just isn't happening and hasn't happened. And so there's like a gap. And that's the gap that I'm really interested in, how, as part of my own wider education and movement building work, of how we could close that gap in my country. And of course, each country has its own situation, and I'm here to find out about other people's, which has been really absolutely fascinating.
Can I just quickly?
Yeah.
Being involved with Basic Income Australia, this comment of the chicken and the egg rings very true to me, because it feels like everybody's waiting for somebody else to act first. It feels like there's a queue of people who want to do more with basic income, but they'll do it once everybody else is doing more. And so it's breaking through that first hurdle that feels like the biggest challenge to me.
So Sue made a comment to us one that's having that person with charisma, and I think among our group, we haven't got that political now, we don't have that recognition. We're sort of just looking people. By I often like that he's got paid on it, the mice. We speak the lion because they chew through the. So I like my nose. I think we little mice.
I just want to add from the American perspective too, that maybe be interested in. So Jack Dorsey put $1 billion worth of Square stock aside specifically for basic income and for women's education around the world. Promoting those two things were the major things. And that was actually into 2020. So then that experienced the inflation in stocks. So that was actually grew to like $4 billion. And I think right now it's like around 2 something in there in the Start Small Fund. And a lot of that, that helped, it was a key point for funding like the mayor's pilots around the country. So like like the billionaires who say they are for basic income, it's like, that's how you should do it. Like we need more like that around the world. Like Gotts Werner was another one who was so central to the Swiss initiative, and that made such a big deal too. So yeah, the trick is to find those and actually put the money where the mouth is. Yes.
I just wanted to make a comment or ask a question to you about whether the concern you have around being small in New Zealand and how difficult it is to kind of engage a population in making a case for basic income on a national level. Maybe it's a prime kind of suspect for or reason to actually look at a coalition that's beyond New Zealand. Because as we all probably agree, basic income to actually really make any effect needs to be a global project. And we always think in national terms because that's the way our heads have been constructed since colonial times. But maybe there's a thing like if we put the ANZUS Treaty and all these other things that we do in Australia for military purposes, maybe there needs to be a coalition between Australia and New Zealand at least. And that might help you on a local level make some kind of larger impact as well. I mean, obviously, everything has to be bio-regional and then it needs to be global, but it's about kind of making those connections. And obviously, there's a fairly large movement in Australia. Anyway, just a thought.
Well, thank you. It's a very good thought. Just a couple of things. First, the work that our movement, the Unemployed Workers Movement in the 90s did on basic income was hugely strengthened by John Tomlinson, who Jenny talked about this morning. I really just wanted to acknowledge John because he invited me over here to speak at an unemployed conference, and I suddenly realised that in Australia there's this amazing guy that's done all this work on basic income, and we were struggling on trying to reinvent the wheel in Auckland. So I have a very positive feeling about what you're suggesting because I know how much John helped us over the following years. He even came to a part in some of our protests on the front line, so that was beautiful. But in terms of now, yes, I think that I'm not only interested in what you're calling a coalition with Australia, I also think we could or should be thinking about our Pacific neighbours.
Yeah.
I'm really interested in basic income in the Pacific, and I hope we may be hearing a little bit about that during the conference because we in Aotearoa are very conscious of being part of Te Moana Nui a Kiwa, the Pacific. But the main problem, I hope this comes to be what you're talking about, the main problem is our lack of a we that's big enough and capable enough to be a partner or a collaborator or building that part of it is what I'm interested in to become strong enough or real enough, I guess. I think the interest is there in our country, but building it to what you're talking about would be a great thing.
It's kind of maybe there's something to kind of match what Scott, I'm sorry, I don't know your name, was talking about guts, the billionaires that fund these kind of things. Maybe there's something around a concept like that, coalition of Pacific advocates of basic income that might trigger somebody to go, actually, this is something beyond just, transforming welfare in Australia or transforming welfare in New Zealand. It's actually looking at it completely from a transversal point of view and going, actually, we are a bio-regional community in the Pacific. Let's look at that as an economics that goes beyond the nation state, goes beyond welfare as we understand. So anyway, just throwing some shit out there, and there's possibly somebody who's got that level of obsession, right? That loves the Pacific in the way that you do, you're talking about, and is able to kind of see beyond the national imaginary.
Well, it has to be. It has to be beyond the national imaginary, which is why we feel very isolated in Aotearoa. And imagine how isolated Pacific Island people feel, even compared to us. So having this conference finally come to Brisbane is a really big deal for us. Just to hear you again I've never heard Scots, but someone from America talking about basic income. How amazing! But it's so inspiring. Literally, see Australians who are just over the border.
I just want to say you've inspired me, and I think we will do that. Because we have collaborated with the UK, but there was a time zone awkwardness. But perhaps if we were doing it with people who were closer, and I didn't even know there was a basic income New Zealand, so I think it's a good potential for collaboration.
Awesome. It's the way to make it where you have it.
Right.
The way's already there, you're just going to connect the ways.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yes.
One of my main concerns around sort of basic income stuff is that how do you prevent corporations from using that as an excuse to not have to pay an adequate wage? And so do you think there is a role for building working power and industrial relations reform to actually be able to we can move around between jobs, and that's what the basic income will facilitate, but also demand more and expect more rather than corporations telling you that you.
Yeah, I think Scott's got some great articles on this, by the way. But the first thing that comes to mind is that when you're free to leave your job because you've got that safety net as a backup, then you can always negotiate more intently than if you didn't. So that would be the first thing. And it really also depends on what kind of job you've got. Is it a job where you're really needed, or is it one where you could be like, oh, that's all right? So. Did you want to say something about this?
Sure. I would say that we're experiencing right now in the U.S. I think other countries too, where we are in this position where you see workers with more bargaining power, and it's funny to see. You see the companies complaining and saying nobody wants to work, everyone's so lazy, and it's well, have you tried raising your wages? And so the companies who have done that and who have actually done things like more flex work at home options, even 4-day work weeks, besides higher wages, better conditions, better hours, these kinds of things, they're the ones finding the workers just fine. So I would argue that with basic income, we would see much more of that bargaining power and also enhanced union power, which is something that I wish more unions would get. That imagine if you increase everyone's individual bargaining power, what that would mean for collective bargaining power. And I just really want unions to get that. And then also I would just say, like I said earlier, as far as I would the way I look at a higher minimum wage is to actually be this incentive besides protecting workers, but to actually amplify the amount of automation out there and to get more jobs ended and replaced by automation that is unnecessary, that they're not investing in right now, besides just the protection of workers. You have another question? Yes.
Actually, I have an automation and aged care question. In Japan, I know that there are humanoid robots that have actually been developed as companions for aged people. I was just wondering, you guys, maybe that could be a focus of the NIA to make some healthcare and aged care.
I think there are better priorities. The jobs where people are treated like robots currently, I think that's the right place to start. Because, kitchens, it's so by the book. Sometimes I talk to people and they say, well, hold on, I love cooking, it's so creative for me. You go into the kitchen, it's not creative. They need this cooked for 3 minutes and this cooked for 1 minute. It's very precise. So the jobs where people are currently being treated as robots, I think that's the best place to start. Yeah.
I never really considered that. I guess I always saw it as the perspective of a basic income would allow more human contact and more humans involved in the process because more people would have the means to volunteer or take care of family members. So yeah, I never thought about it from that perspective.
Well, again, one of the books for reading, Bullshit Jobs, is about how a person was a carer, but they ended up quitting because they're there for emergencies. Most of the time, they just go down their mind. So in that sort of respect, something that doesn't get bored, like a robot, could actually be handy. I know that, like I said, that have been developed in Japan. I believe they're actually quite popular.
out something for you, Ashley, which is that the way that I see it, people shouldn't have to do that caring work. So, how do you see that? I feel like it's a little bit of a for people.
It's a good point, but who would do it?
That's what I'm trying to get to. They don't have to.
My comment, sorry.
Yeah.
If I can't.
Yeah.
I kind of subscribe to the view that if we have a UBI, we have more leisure time. If we look at actually what is work and what isn't work, like yes, we get rid of some of the work that we may not want to do, but work is any contribution we make to society. And looking after somebody as part of your day-to-day when you're not also trying to make ends meet and you're not also working 3 jobs and all the rest of it becomes a much easier task.
Right.
That's why I don't see that there's no jobs in an automated world. I think we just have different, we contribute in different ways. And I would hope that we get our heart back and our connection with each other back as part of that process.
Anyone else have any questions? Like, I actually have I'm curious too. This is so both for New Zealand and Australia. Like, what kind of step, like in the New Zealand context, you said that you got a majority power of the what is it, the Labour Party, and they're not for it right now. Like, is there like a policy that you can adjust that could be like a step towards basic income that they would like get behind? Like in the US, we're trying to do the child tax credit. We think that that's something that can really get momentum going. So I'm just curious, in the context of these 2 countries, what kind of steps towards basic income could they potentially be like the first things?
Yeah, and that's always a strategic question. What are the in-between steps? And that's really important. As Ian made very clear in his paper, which some people were here for, New Zealand superannuation actually is already a UBI for everyone 65 and older. That's everyone, you can keep working, you just pay tax according to the appropriate rate. So we actually have had, in effect, a UBI. It's just never called that. But it is that, and Ian's right about that. And we have a child tax credit system, but it's a problem because it pays differentially. You get more money if the parents are in so many hours of paid work with the parent or parents, but if you're not in paid work, you get less, which again, the classic problems with the welfare system that penalises the people who are worst off and in the worst situation. So I think the Green Party and possibly other places are starting to call or think of whether calling for a universal child benefit may be a first next step. And again, wouldn't that be interesting if Australia and New Zealand were doing that at the same time? I don't know where Australia is on pilot projects because we've gone nowhere on pilot projects, which I also see as another kind of next step. So that might be another thing I'd quite be interested to explore with this country.
Yeah.
I think nowhere's pretty good. There was something proposed by the Greens. I'm credit for that. New South Wales Greens proposed a statewide, not a statewide. There was a particular town. Do you know?
Yes, so it was proposed to be just now. I personally don't. I think it needs to be a whole state. It would be a closed economy experiment, but yes, that we did propose it as an election issue.
I'm not just aside from that. Sorry.
We know better.
Care could be a place that Labor could be convinced to get behind UBI. I don't think the arts and creativity will do it. I had a shadow minister for cities and infrastructure reach out to me last year, asked me, what do we need to do for the arts? I was like, UBI. I was like, oh no, can't get behind that. I was like, what else? It's like, UBI.
Yeah.
And I can tell you why, all the benefits that come from it. You're not going to get any of those benefits if you invest in other aspects of a little bit more funding, a little bit more space, whatever piecemeal kind of arts funding, infrastructural change. And I pushed him on it a bunch, and he said Labor's never going to go for it. It's like, well, that's a real pity, isn't it?
Yeah.
And now they're in power. Now he's a minister, not for employment or for the arts, which is good. It's just, it's ideology. And, as many people in different kind of talks have said today, it's not an ideology which Labor can't be convinced of. It's part of Marxist thinking. But somehow we've just forgotten about that. You know, labour movements forgotten about that. Union movements forgotten about that. Someone asked in another panel before, why are unions not forgotten? And it's like, I think it's because of power. You know, they've agglomerated power in a position which is based on a certain ideology. And something like UBI is so kind of revolutionary in its thinking, it might shift that power.
Just very quickly, because I was interested in the union worker question before as well, because that's kind of my background as well. And I think one of the, and it of course applies to the Labor Party in New Zealand as well as the Labor Party in Australia because of the influence of some of unions. In the kind of workshops I've been in over the past few years, the place where I've seen hope with people from the union movement is in the work around climate justice and thinking about just transition. And if you start to think of just transition and degrowth, if there's any serious thought about that, and there are some union people doing that in New Zealand, I'm sure there are here, even though it's tough for them. I think that might be the chink that could get through in the end if the Labor parties ever become serious enough about climate change and link that to union principles. You go down the climate justice route, you do get to basic income.
Just on that, I did leave out another sort of bit of the Greens initiative in Australia in the last federal election was in relation to just transitioning in coal communities, was to give that sort of guaranteed income support for when people are transitioning from one old industry into a new one. And that's one of the perfect places for a UBI. So perhaps that's where you begin to bring it in as well in those towns where they're losing their jobs rapidly.
I think it's interesting too how this question of what could be a baby step towards basic income and to like find a new like demographic, and it's so I don't even know what they're officially called. Correct me if there's an official word for this, but like what is the demographic of people who are like pre-seniors, pre-retirement, like they're not receiving the
But they're close.
the thing yet? What?
But they're close.
Yeah, but they're close.
Yes.
So if you could show, because I've seen that those people can tend to be like they lose their jobs and then they find it so difficult to find jobs until they reach that age, and then it'll be helped. But like that would be like a new group that you could expand it to. Same thing like care leavers. Like I'm excited about the Wales pilot, and also in the U.S. It seemed to be getting traction in California, where we focused on in Santa Clara County on people living in foster care. And then that was expanded statewide, and I'm hoping that could go to other states and even nationwide. Then, so right now, basically, most countries have kids and seniors, and so it's like, what else can we do to like feed into that? It's like more age groups.
Yes.
Can I just say quickly, I did an exercise as a group to think about which demographics do we want to target, and it was about artists and parents and single people and kids and adults, and we realized, hold on, actually, we've in many ways counted every single person could benefit in some way.
Yeah.
So, yeah, this demographic perspective is kind of a funny one.
Yeah.
Because it's everybody.
Yeah. Anybody else? Oh, yes.
I think we can hear. You mentioned that in New Zealand and Australia, more or less only the Green Party has the UBI in its platform. When you discuss with economists about climate change, they all say that the right thing to do is to apply the principle who pollutes pays, which means that we should all pay for our carbon emissions. But if everybody pays for the carbon emissions, the price, the cost of all the products increase, the gasoline, everything. So many people cannot afford anymore to pay for these products. So we need to give money to these people so that they can afford the inflation, which is a consequence of the application of the principle who pollutes pays. So my question is, isn't the UBI the right channel to send the money to the people so that they can afford the necessary inflation on the bad products, on the polluting products? And as a consequence, isn't it the Green Party the most relevant party to promote UBI in the next years?
Yes.
Yeah, what is there, like, yeah. it's
She
hard
is
to
the
do that.
Green Party representative.
I'm biased.
Yeah, what kind of potential is there for a carbon dividend in Australia or New Zealand?
I mean, that was a big political drama a while back. I don't know if you heard about this.
Yeah.
Does anybody else? I don't know the full story. I just know it's a mess.
Been going for 30 or 40 years, that kind of, it's great.
You got it.
I was just going to say, from my memory of what happened was, it was implemented and then voted out, and it was a big problem. They basically invalidated it as ever being viable in
But
Australia.
it was a carbon tax, not a carbon dividend, right?
Oh,
Or
right.
was it a carbon dividend?
No, it was taxes.
Yeah, to your point, that you have to match those two together, not just one.
There was a payment, an increase in all payments that was associated with the carbon tax in Australia, and there was overcompensation at the bottom. But it was all means like it was all
Right.
to the means tested system. It wasn't an all.
It didn't go to the middle class.
Being universal, it was framed as all people will pay more in the carbon tax, so we'll give some extra support to lower carbon tax.
Right. Okay, well, let's thank you, panel, for being here. Thank you, audience.
Thank you, Scott.
Yeah, well said.
Thanks so much.